This is an interview with Ruby Paxon, 94 years old, next month, at her home, 14 Hart Street, Akron, New York, on February 3, 1981. Ruby is the widow of Leon Paxon and mother of Judge Leon Paxon. The interviewer is Gladys Brown. Ruby came to Akron as a bride in 1908.
Akron in 1908. I was 21 years old, and I was a bride. And I lived down on Cedar Street in the Paxon house.
This is an interview with Ruby Paxon, 94 years old next month, at her home, 14 Hart Street in Akron, New York, on February 3, 1981. Ruby is the widow of Leon Paxon and mother of Judge Leon Paxon. The interviewer is Gladys Brown.
Cedar Street, over onto Pearl Place, 8 Pearl Place. And we built that house. Nelson King, who was a contractor then, builder contractor, he built that house. And we lived there for 32 years, I believe it was. And then we bought, the war came on in 1940. My husband died in 1940. And then both the boys, right after that, went away to war. Robert was in Japan. He was a commander on an aircraft carrier. And Leon was in Judge Advocate's office in Algiers. And I didn't see either one of them for about 3 years. And then I moved down on Main Street, up over Leon. My son Leon had an office downstairs, law office. And so then when they were both, just before he went, I moved up there over Mike George's, and I lived there for a while. Then I moved down in the Buck place. All the old timers know Harry and Melvina Buck and Mrs. Buck. And then when the war was over, I moved up here on Hart Street, and Marlo Perry lived here then. And Marlo bought my house down on Pearl Place. And this house is supposed to be about 100 years old. And I had the deeds out the other day looking at them. And as far as we can find out, this house was moved here. Arlene Robinson told me about this. Her father told her. This was how there was a doctor. I think his name was Crane. Anyway, that's the name on the deed. And he had some kind of a hospital here in Akron. And this was a patient's hospital. They'd moved the patients up here. And so it's quite old. It's around 100 years old now, I guess. But
Nell Brown, you said?
Nell Brown, and she was cashier, and we had 2 banks in Akron at that time. And she had 2 children. Her husband had died, and both her children died of diphtheria, but I don't know whether it was this house or not. It was part of the Tonawanda Reservation.
Tell us some more about your sons.
Well, Leon went to law school. He graduated from the University of Buffalo, and then he established his own law office here, and I don't remember what date that was. And then Leon finally became a family court judge for 20 years or something. And he lost out when it was a Democrat year. And Robert went to Merchant Marine Academy down near New York someplace. And he graduated from there, and he went into the Navy, and he retired as captain in the Navy. And he has 1 child, and Leon had 1 boy, and Leon has 2 boys. Well, Leon's son, Billy, is a legislator. He's had 2 terms, and he's running for the 3rd term.
In Erie County.
In Erie County. About 1924, I organized a school lunch. And I didn't get any pay for it. What I make, if I'd make over the expenses of the day, that was my pay. And we used to buy cocoa by the pound. Larkins had a store here and used to make cocoa. Made it practically with water, just a little milk. And mothers would call me up and ask me how I made that delicious cocoa because their kids wanted cocoa for the next day. And they couldn't believe it when I tell them, it was just Larkin cocoa. We sold sandwiches for 3 cents. And I would buy cheese and melt it and put pimentos in it, make cheese sandwich. I go to meat markets and buy ends of ham and make grind that up. I'd make all soups home. Soups we sold for 3 cents a bowl. And I had 2 girls helping me. Helen Reber was one, and what was that? I've forgotten what that other girl's name was. Turning up there. Paula Slater was the other girl. And they used to let them out for the last session at school to come over and help me. And then they would get their lunch for free.
Where was this lunch
Downstairs
prepared?
in the library, in the library building, and had a 3-burner gas plate. And just as soon as school was out, no rain or shine, they'd line up. Sometimes it would be up to the corner and way over to the school. High school kids and all would come in there. And and then there was a little platform at the end, and we just had a little entertainment. The kids would get up and speak a piece or sing a song or something. And really, they just loved it. And that was the end of that there. They'd line up and they'd wait their turn. We had a counter there, and these 2 girls would help. I never had any trouble with them at all. They were lovely to me, all of them. And they would come day after day, and we didn't have any special menu, just cheese sandwiches, peanut butter. Oh, we used to buy a pail at Larkin's, and they just loved it.
After that, you had a bakery?
In 1933, we had the bakery. Mrs. Webster and I had the bakery.
Now, what Webster?
Mrs. James Webster, Kelsey Webster's mother. And it used to be Gross's Bakery. And we had the same oven that they had, and we used to heat with coke. We used coke, soft coal. Mm-hmm. And we had no equipment, only our hands that we used. And we had everything was homemade, everything. At one time, we hired a baker from Buffalo to come out, and he made fancy things, but they didn't go, so we didn't keep him. And we had that until 8 years. Until 1940, we had it. Because when my husband died, I thought he died in November, in December we closed up. That was kind of fun there, too, because we had free transportation. And that was Depression time then, too. And Leon and the bus company gave me a pass for Leon to go to school. And turn this on. And I said, I know. Leon was in law school and commuting. And he used to take 25 cents a day. But he would take his lunch in his briefcase. And the understanding was that if there was any passenger standing, he'd have to let them have a seat. And so there's one boy, and one would sit down, and the other one, and come to find out this other boy from Batavia was going back and forth with a pass, too. But Mrs. Webster and I, we had some wonderful trips. We went to Florida twice on that.
How did you get this bus pass?
We asked for it. They paid us 10% on all our tickets that we sold. And I said, well, couldn't we have, because I was always out after everything I could get. And I said, well, couldn't we have a pass? Well, they said they didn't know. Well, I said we'd have to have a pass, so they gave us both a pass. So we used that. Leon used that till he got through school then.
Was that because you were selling bus tickets in your bakery?
Yeah. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. We didn't know what we'd call our bakery. And finally, Kelsey Webster came up with the name, the Cookie Jar. And that's what we always went by, the name, the Cookie Jar. And it used to make us so mad because the churches would have bake sales on Saturday. Saturday was our big day. And they would come over and they'd borrow our scales, they'd borrow our containers, borrow our bags. And we didn't like that because we would have things left over then. And every Monday morning there was one certain man came in and he pulled around those boxes on Monday morning to see what was left from Saturday because we'd sell it cheap. He turned his horse in the bakery and she worked for nothing, just for all the canned goods or bakery things that she could have. And of course we could buy eggs and bacon and pork loins and cheese, and we'd let her have it. But finally we got so we could pay her, and we paid her $3 a week.
What other businesses can you recall along Main Street which have long since disappeared?
Well, Fanny Curtis and Orpha Curtis had a little it wasn't a 5 and 10 cent store, but they sold ladies' stockings and few things like that, handkerchiefs and veils and ribbons and like that. And they were now where the pizzeria stand is. And then there was a couple hat stores down on Main Street, too.
Those were the days when everyone wore hats.
Yeah, Mrs. Egan had one, and I forgot what that other woman's name was. Down the street had one. Now it turned out there was one time. There was a laundry down on Main Street one time, and a jewelry store, and Mills and Peterson had the Ford agency for a long time, where the C&E is now. And then the Akron post office moved from down Panagakis building up to where that men's store is now. And that was a picture show one time in there, too. Mm-hmm. It was a livery. I think there were 2 liveries at that time, because George Bostic, who lives in the corner there where Floyd Flint, on the corner of, what is that street there?
Is it the Black House?
No, Clinton, corner of Clinton Street, and John, that brick house there. George Bostwick lived there, and he had a livery, and he used to go and meet that train that came in on the Peanut every day, and over down to the other, down on the depot down there, where it always has been.
What sort of a vehicle would that be that he met the trains with?
Well, in the winter he had a sled. I can see that, just a sled it was. It was like a plain plank thing with sides on it. But in the he had a horse and buggy. Yes, he would meet them and take them to the different hotels. Newstead Hotel, and Bitterman's had a hotel down the end of Main Street. Oh, and she was an awful good cook. And then Altenburg's had one where the fire hall is now.
The salesman would then have to rent a horse and buggy to get around?
Yes, they'd have to rent a horse and buggy, or one of the that had the livery stable would drive them around.
What were some of the social activities when you were a young married woman in this town?
Well, there weren't too many. Really, there weren't too many. Church, Ladies' Aid, that was the important one of all the churches. But and then the Eastern Star had they'd have a dinner once in a while, but there weren't too many activities. They were card clubs that the older women had. But then the younger women started, and we had 16 and there's only Edna Kratz and myself that are alive yet. We played everything from Pedro to 500 to bridge, canasta, and everything. But they're all gone now. I was a Presbyterian. I was married in the West Avenue Presbyterian Church. And so when I come out here and I found that the principal activities, if you wanted to be anybody, you really had to belong one or the other. And fortunately, I could belong to both of them because my father was a Mason. And
so this Presbyterian Ladies' Aid was the real social club of the community.
Huh? Yes, the Presbyterian Ladies' Aid was really the thing in Akron.
Movies were an important thing in those days, I understand.
Movies. Oh yes, every Saturday night I would go down to the A&P and buy 3 big candy bars and take my 2 kids down there. They'd sit right up in front, and I'd sit back, and my husband would help run the machine down there.
Where was the movie house?
Right where Friedman's store is, right back of that, where the old supermarket was. And that's where the dances were always held, too. The firemen's dances were held there. And the basketball games. And we used to have nice times. You know?
There was no auditorium or gymnasium in connection with the high school then, right?
I don't think so, because we never went there. The firemen would always have a dinner. And then you'd go to that dinner, 6, 7 o'clock. And then you'd go down the hall and dance till 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. My husband didn't dance, you know, and I danced. Now Viola Stapleton, Stapleton's mother there. What's his name there? Jimmy Stapleton lived next door to me down on Pearl Place, and his mother was a beautiful dancer, and so she had a little dancing school up here in the Calvary Baptist Church now, and I used to go up and I used to be a dancing teacher. We used to help her with them. We used to have, she used to charge 25 cents, for a night. And then we'd have donuts and coffee. Take our kids up there for a while, and then they'd go home because they only had to go down through the cemetery, And I remember when I first came to Akron, the Ball Diamond was down there on Franklin Street. There was a man by the name of Johnson lived in the corner, and he had a milk dairy. No, he didn't have a milk dairy. He had patent medicines, and all the rest of that property, all on Pearl Street, on that side was a Ball Diamond.
You remember Perry starting a dairy?
I remember them. They came from, I knew Mabel Perry before she was married. And they moved to Lockport. And then he came here and he started a dairy. And then he used to make candy too. And then he made ice cream. And he started making ice cream. And then he sold it down the school.
Can you tell us more about the movies?
Well, Victor, what's his name? Cummings there. What got his name? And then after that, Theodore Stapleton had it for years and years and years. And I go there Saturday nights, and they had good shows. And Irene Sherwood played the piano there. And at the dancing school over there, Onley Parker played the piano, and Nick Bailey played the flute. That was our music. It was good too. We used to have square dances and all those nice dances. Very nice there. But I always felt a little wicked because those beautiful stained glass windows there. And it was a church, I always had that feeling it wasn't right. But we had a good time there, and we ate ice cream, and Lou Sutton and his brother ran it, owned it and operated it. And after they would close down for the day, we'd go send over there, and we'd get a pail full of condensed milk for free, and also whipped cream for free. And we'd send the kids over there. They didn't like to go. And there was a mushroom tunnel. Howard Bell had it someplace up around the Five Corners someplace. And we'd get a great big basket of mushrooms for a quarter. I came here to Akron, and I'd go in the meat market. They used to give me the sweetbreads. They said, I happened to ask if they had them one day, and they said, no, we don't sell them. He said, we give them to you. So they gave me sweetbreads. Yes, a soup bone. Yes, you'd get it. And if you'd buy a soup, if you bought one, you'd get a great big, almost a whole leg of a cow for a quarter, I don't remember.
Now, during World War I, do you remember anything particular about those days?
No. Did I say about Lynn being drafted? He wasn't drafted. He got his notice to go over. That isn't being drafted, was it?
Not if he enlisted. Had he enlisted?
No, he hadn't enlisted yet. They all had to report over to the draft board. I guess they were drafted. And they went over to Lancaster. And my husband was a hale, hearty man, tall and slim, never had a day's sickness in his life. And he came home with a heart trouble. And he had it till he died. And I don't remember too much of that. My children were little, and life went on, and here and there, and we went to church. I know that the women used to take their knitting to church.
During the war?
During the war, We all took our knitting. And we knitted those helmets with that open face, remember? And sweaters and socks. And the poor soldiers that had to wear some of those socks, Now they have no heel in them, and then they had a heel, and that was awful hard to turn that heel, but I learned how to do it.
Can you tell us about shortages in World War I?
I can tell you about sugar, and I go, and sometimes you could buy a quarter of a pound of sugar, and we had ration stamps, and I'd buy it whenever I could, and I'd be afraid I'd hide it around, and I'd have little packages of sugar hidden all around. I was afraid I'd be arrested for hoarding sugar. And then I stopped using sugar in my tea and coffee, and I've never used it since, because I thought the children needed it more than I did. And we substituted cornmeal and rolled oats in bread, and that made awful good bread, too. We used to make our bread mostly then.
What do you remember about World War II?
Well, I remember that they both went, and I was alone, and I worked at the Buffalo Arms then during the war, and we worked 10 hours and a half at night. And I never was in a machine. Well, I was in a machine shop because my father was the president of one. And I stood up at those lathes night after night, 10 hours, and it was a long night. And then they had a wonderful cafeteria there, though. And we would take our lunch, but we'd go and buy coffee for 5 cents or pie or anything. And at 2 o'clock, they would bring around to us all the coffee that was left, and it was so sweet. But we drank it, and it tasted good too. And then in the summer when we worked there, they used to make us take salt pills, and they made us sick sometimes. Well, I got an infection back in my ear while I was working there, and of course I couldn't work, and while I was home, then they closed up down there. But it was fun. It was nice there.
Now, Buffalo Arms was where Strippett is now. Who died? Oh, you were in the city of Buffalo.
Yeah, yes.
Well, there was.
Every night, and sometimes
you went into
Sunday,
Buffalo?
we went into Buffalo. Bill Murray drove one week, and Claude Bistoff drove the next week. And I think we paid him 50 cents a trip, 50 cents a round trip. Of course, gasoline was rationed then, too, and so they really had to go on pools. And, it used to be so cold coming home in the morning, we stood up. The only time we could sit down was when we had a half hour for lunch. And we went at 7 o'clock at night until 6:30 in the morning.
For how long did you do this?
Well, I did till the war was over.
How much would you have earned a day then?
I don't remember, but I think we started at 65 cents an hour, and that was an awful lot. And then we used to work before that. Every woman that could would work down at one of the canning factories. Before we worked there, they worked at the canning factories, and they only got 25 cents an hour there.
Where were the canning factories?
Lockport. And they'd send a bus up after us, and we would work down there.
Would you say that everyone who was able to work and could leave their children had jobs then?
Yes, they did. Everybody who could work. And then they would just beg us to work. And I remember one woman and I, Mrs. Shanley, we didn't want to work down there. And we said, well, we would work if we could work together. So we did. And when we got down there, they separated us. We wouldn't work. So they put us together. I often think of that too, Well, we did have ration stamps during World War II. And it was quite hard for me to get any meat because I had to sleep during the day, and then I would just wake up in time to eat some dinner and be over there to go to work at 7 o'clock at night. But the Bates and Brucker and Bates had the meat market then, and they would save me things. So I didn't suffer, though, for that. And Weaver was a minister at the Methodist Church, and he was a great comfort to me because he would stop in and talk to me. I thought everybody thought the world of that minister.
Do you remember the burning of the Methodist Church?
Oh, yes, I remember that very well. I lived down on Cedar Street then, or on Pearl Place, and I remember going up there and going in the house and helping carry things out.
Of the parsonage?
Of the parsonage and sending them on the lawn. And we all stood crying up there when we see that church burned down. This church is nice, but that other was awful nice church. I had so many pleasant memories there. They had a lovely Methodist Ladies' Aid there, too. And we'd go 25 cents for this dinner. And we who had kids took them there. And they had those pillars around the post. And our kids would swing around those. And we had a group of, when my children were small there, that every Sunday there were 4 or 5 couples. We all had children. Have to go to Sunday school and then to church. Then we'd come home, change our clothes, and go down to Feeder, down on the reservation it is. Every Sunday we'd go down there, rain or shine.
Now, what was Feeder?
Well, it was a little thing a creek down there mostly, just a creek.
Oh, I think I know. It was a sort of canal that fed water to the Erie Canal in Lockport.
Is that right? Yes, was it. And we'd go down there and take our dinner and our supper and swim all afternoon. That a lot of these couples joined the church. I joined before they did, but of course my children had to go to Sunday school and when they were little, and they went to the Baptist Sunday school. Well, then I thought, I'll join the Baptist. I thought, well, I might as well join the Baptist church because they had to go to Sunday school, that was all. And then the minister came to see me, and I said, yeah, I will join. And he said, making preparation for baptism. And I said, well, I don't want to be baptized. I've been baptized. They wouldn't let me join. So I took the kids out, and we all went to the Baptist church, or the Methodist church. Leon joined, and the Blucks and the Stapletons, and a lot of them, these young couples all joined in. No, he said I had to be baptized.
What do you remember about Christmas celebrations?
Well, I remember home that we always we had sliding doors in between our hall and our dining room. And they were always closed a few days before Christmas because Santa Claus was coming. And we never saw our presents till Christmas morning. My father and mother trimmed the tree. We never saw the tree trim either. Then when I was married, we always had a Christmas tree. I have a Christmas tree. Just 1 year we didn't have it, and I have one every year now. I like my Christmas tree. Children always love Christmas, so too. And citizens. And I like that too. That is nice.
Remember the celebration at the end of World War I?
Well, I remember that we marched, all the women and everything, big march, big parade it was. And they had an effigy of the Kaiser at the corner of Monroe, Clinton Street and Main Street. And they burned it. And Mrs. Burdick marched with us that night. And that's Mrs. Tillman. And that's where they named, he was the first boy killed. And they named Tillman Post here from him. And his mother marched that night, and she didn't know yet that he'd been killed.
I understand there was a big typhoid epidemic here in the 20s.
Yes, that was in 1926. The Eastern Stars had the celebration that year, Labor Day. And it was the biggest celebration that Akron has ever had before or since. All the saloons donated a lot of money to us because they were all open and they did a big business that day. But we wrote to Chicago, New York, Philadelphia for donation to all the big stores, and they all responded. And we made so much money that year. And then that was in Labor Day. Well, right after that, children started getting sick. And my own son Robert got the typhoid fever. And every day when Leon would go to school, he'd come back and he'd say, this one and that one died. And it was terrible. I had a trained nurse for Robert for 1 whole month. And then in those days, most of the medicines were liquids. And it was terrible for typhoid. It was awful tasting medicine. And I'm telling you, I said more prayers that time than I think I ever said in my life. I'd get on my knees and I'd beg that child to take his medicine, and he wouldn't do it. Couldn't do it. And he was just wasting away, and he was starting a hemorrhage. And the doctor said, you must have a trained nurse. So he got one for me. My mother came out, and she told him, she said, Robert, if you'll take your medicine, I'll buy you a bicycle. And that was a big thing then. And you know, he took his medicine. And he was, that was in September. And he was still in bed in November. And my brother came out from Christmas, and I remember we had a roast goose, and he wanted to know if he couldn't see it. And I thought my mother said, let him see it if he wants to see it. So we took it up, and that was the first salad that he had eaten was a soft-boiled egg that day. And, it was terrible, the way the people died here. And I'll never forget that. And I went to New York before the doctor said they had typhoid. I was a matron at Eastern Star that year, and then the grand officers meet once a year. And I didn't want to go. And the doctor, they had a county doctor here then, Dr. Archibald. And And the nurse was an Eastern Star, and she said, "Now I'll watch him." And she said, "If he has it," she said, I forgot what hotel I stayed at. She said, "We'll call you and let you know." Well, we chartered a train, and we got there Sunday morning. We left. We got there in the afternoon. It took a long time then to go to New York. And that night, she telephoned. He had typhoid fever. I came home the next morning. Now, and just before that, I had to Beaumont. I've been going to Beaumont for winters. And
Beaumont, is that Texas?
Beaumont, Texas. And we went to the First Presbyterian Church there. First Methodist, I mean. And they had kneeling benches. And I liked that. Mm-hmm. And it's the only Methodist church I ever knew that had kneeling benches. Mm-hmm. Only in a Presbyterian church when I was a little girl they had them. I liked it. I liked to kneel in church. President McKinley was shot. My mother and my brothers, I had one sister and two brothers. We were at the Pan American the day before, and when he was shot, and my father, he was laid in state in I think St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Buffalo, and on a Sunday, my father took me to view it, I guess you'd say. And we had to stand, and it was raining, and it was cold, and we stood for hours outside, and finally my father said we couldn't stay there any longer, so we didn't see him. I remember that so well. I remember the Pan American, too. That was nice. John Panagakis came from Buffalo, and he opened a candy, chocolate, and ice cream store. Well, he lived at the corner of Monroe and Main Street. And the Akron post office was on the other side of the candy store, and the Masonic Hall was upstairs. And then the Masonic Hall, then John got married after the post office went out of there. And he moved, after the Masonic Hall moved out of there, Masons. And then John got married and lived upstairs and rented the apartment on the other side.
The Masonic Hall was in the building with the candy kitchen?
Yes, it was upstairs, the whole upstairs. The post office, old Akron post office, was downstairs, and the candy store was next door. They moved from down on Main Street, and they moved up on where the men's clothing store is now. And my husband's nephew was a postmaster, Roy Paxon. And I think Mr. Downey was a postmaster after him. And I don't remember, but Ed Laughlin. No, Mr. Skellen was a postmaster someplace. I don't remember where. But the children would know. Well, that's another story. I was a telephone operator, see. And my girlfriend, Alice Wacker, we used to go, then, we used to go take trips on Sunday. And I said, well, I got a cousin living out in Crittenden, and let's go out and see her. So we called, I think I wrote to her then, and she said, yes, they took their milk down to the depot. So I said, well, we will come to the telephone office because we were telephone. The telephone office was right where Board and Arrow had their, right next to Cena's, to the candy, to the beauty shop there. The next building was a telephone office. So Alice and I walked up. The train got in about 9 o'clock, and George had to come down for the milk yet. So we walked up to the telephone office. And as we were city girls, Mina Foster worked in there then, in the telephone office. And this young fellow came in, good-looking fellow, and he said where we were going, and we told him, and he said, well, how would it be if I bring my friend up this afternoon? And we said, that was fine. So they came up with a horse and buggy, and he brought Lynn up. That's where I met him.
That was over in Crittenden.
Yeah, on the Crittenden Road.
But you had to come to Akron by train to get there.
Yeah, and then we had to go back at night. I think the train went, one train left about 7 o'clock, so we went back then.
And this was the old Peanut or the West Shore?
The West Shore, yeah, the West Shore. I never rode on the Peanut. Was maybe somebody's told you, Patsy White was a conductor on that West Shore as long as I could remember. And I think it only cost, around 50 cents one way on the train. Did anyone ever tell you that? No, I don't. It wasn't more than $1 round trip, I know. And you'd see everybody you knew was on the trip, on that train, you know.
Years. Can you tell us something of your work there and your early experiences?
Yes, I can say that our library didn't amount to very much. And once in a while you could go there and find a book, but we didn't go very often. Well, then I started a book club around 1920. We had 26 members, and each paid $2, and we could keep a book 2 weeks. And I would go out to Ulbricht's, and I got acquainted with a clerk out there, and she would select the books for me. We'd keep them 2 weeks, and then we'd pass them on to the nearest one who lived near us. When we finished the book, we would give it to the library. Well, from then on, the library seemed to start up a little bit. And Gertrude King was a librarian there for 11 years. And when I went there, the room, which is now the children's room, was filled with big, high, black walnut bookcases. The wood came from the Denial Farm up on the main road. And when those books, Grace Churchill, who was a teacher down here at the school, donated books, and everybody that had books donated. Well, after Gert died, I was appointed librarian, and the school had charge of it then. So it just went along like that for a long time. There was kindergarten upstairs there was kindergarten downstairs. Mrs. What was her name? Pentecost had downstairs, and Barbara Wetson had upstairs. And they had their little children's rack in the big room there. And when I would come, they'd have to take it out and put it in the back room. We only worked a few hours a week then. And finally, the county took over. And when the county took over, they changed the whole library. It was all those beautiful black walnut bookcases were painted green, cut down about as 5 foot they were. And they were beautiful. And all those books that were in that back room, the county girls came out and threw them all out. And we had box after box after box. Historical books, histories, all the Bobbsey twin books, and all the Elsie Dinsmore books, and those boys' books. What were they? I forgot what they were. But it was a shame, and there was beautiful black walnut bookcases, cut down and painted green. Well, then when the county took over, they threw all those out. They weren't right. So they sold those beautiful black walnut bookcases for $12. Beautiful one. In fact, Lynn's got 2 or 3 up at his house now, and we could have sold an awful lot of those. Well, then when I was going to say before, when Mrs. King died, I didn't know sickum about that library because she wouldn't let me do a thing but put the books back on the shelves.
Now, you had worked with Mrs. King for a while
for about 2 years as page. And I would go there and she'd say, Ruby, the books need dusting today. So I'd go and dust them and then dust up the floor with a dust mop. But then when she got sick and finally I had her daughter asked me if I would go if she was sick. So I said, yes, I'd go. And I didn't know one single thing. I didn't know enough to take the card out the book. And it was in the file there because she wouldn't let me touch them. All I could do was put the books back on the shelf. And I had those books. We had a great big black walnut. Do you remember that counter as you went in there?
Yes, I do.
And I had that all filled up, the floor, so I couldn't hardly get it. Finally, I thought, well, I got to do it. So I would stay there and do it. And finally, I got it straightened out. And without the help of the county girls, I never could have stayed there because they were just wonderful to me. Well, then the card catalog. They wanted to look at the card catalog. And I said, well, what's that? I didn't know. And she said, well, don't you have a card catalog? And I said, well, there's something out in that other room. And they looked and they said, well, there's a few cards in here. Where's the rest of them? Well, I didn't know. And so we looked around and we found them all in boxes up in the cabinet there. So different ones on the library board, took these cards home and straightened them all out. Well, from then on, I knew how to catalog books, and it was a joy to get books. And my greatest joy was to order new books there, and I would go way beyond my budget, every year. But they would let me have them. They'd say, "Well, you can't have that many next year." But every year it was the same. I went beyond my budget every time. Well, then I said, "Well, what should we do with these?" They would come out from Buffalo every once in a while and look over the books and pick out what they thought should be discarded. We had books carved from the floor to the ceiling. Well, and I asked Mr. Rounds if I couldn't give them away. "Oh, no," he said, "you can't give them away." But I had already given away hundreds. I would say to anybody, they'd say, "What are these boxes?" And I said, "They're the discarded books." "Well, what are you going to do with them?" "Well," I said, "I have to send them to Buffalo." And Mr. Rounds told me they burned them, but the driver told me they just put them in barrels outside the library, and anybody that went by could help themselves. So I thought, if they can help themselves, Akron people can too. So everybody that wanted a book, let them have them. And well, then finally, I wrote a letter to Mr. Rounds, and I asked him if I couldn't let Akron people have them. By no means, he said, they have to be sent in. I still have his letter. But the people got a lot of good reading for free, and I thought that's the way it should be. They helped pay for those books, and they should have them.
Now, in those years that you were in the library, Ruby, there were people who helped you in there. Who were some of those?
Well, I think the Fanny Rampson was one, and that Joan Long. And then I think I was there a long time alone. I did everything, bookwork and everything. I had no helpers whatsoever.
How many years were you in there?
25, when I went from librarian. And then I had Dorothy Packman work for a long time, Julie DeYoung, and then Betty Wright. Betty was the last one. Betty was the best one. and now, I was there librarian 25 years, page a couple years before that.
And you've really seen that library grow.
Oh, yes. The first year I took over, I can't tell you how many thousand more volumes went out, but our circulation was.
What were the hours in the old days?
Oh, just about 3 days a week, maybe 6 hours. Mm-hmm. And then it gradually went up. Now it's 30 hours a week. The hours increased, of course, the pay increased too. And that's the best job for a woman in Akron. It's the best paid job in Akron right today. Some winters we just froze there. They had an awful old furnace. And sometimes we'd keep our overshoes and our coats on to work. It was so cold. Over the years, when Percy Ball was the town clerk, and he had charge kind of over there, we'd call him up and he'd come right over, even not put his coat on. I saw an awful lot of Percy Ball. All the time I was there, Percy was my right hand. I wonder how he retired in January 72, I guess it was. And 72, I was 85, and I'm 94. I was 93, so when was that when I retired?
8 years ago.
This was starting the 9th this year.
Mm-hmm.
And they had a banquet for me and downstairs in the library. And Mrs. Mecca, let's see there, she furnished it, she catered it. She catered it. And they gave me a little red cranberry antique cup and saucer and a beautiful centerpiece. Oh, it was so beautiful. That was from the whole town, all the people that were there. But the board gave me a pin and earrings with real pearls in them. And I I don't wear the earrings much because I'm afraid I'll lose them, and I should wear them too. But they're beautiful. They really are. And I've had many happy memories of that library. In fact, I was in there last Monday, and one of the old patrons came in. He was so glad to see me, came up and shook hands. Some of them come up and kissed me, you know. And it seems so good to see them there because I loved everybody that came in. I had many happy memories. One time there was a man came in the afternoon, and he sat in the big room there, looking right at me all the time. And finally he went to sleep. And you couldn't wake him up, and I got afraid. So I called the police, and they came, and that poor man had been sleeping in cars around. And I don't know what they ever did to him, but anyway, he never came in again. It was cold weather, too, you know. But I used to have a little trouble once in a while with the younger kids, you know. They bring pocket radios in there, playing. And just as soon as I would discover it, I would make them stop. And some children I had to forbid to come into the library until they could behave themselves. But they would finally come back, you know. They'd get in the other room, get back in the corner where I couldn't see them and talk and laugh. And I couldn't have that in the library. But all in all, it's a beautiful place to work.
You recall the Chautauquas that used to come to town?
Oh, yes, and that was a big event of the year. I've forgotten. I think the tickets were only $2 and $1 for children. And they had 3 sessions a day in the morning for the children. And they would have readers that take the children out for games. It was wonderful. Oh, my children were 10 and 12 years old. And kids would look forward to that. Well, then in the afternoon they'd have things, and at night things. And we had William Jennings Bryan was out here one time lecture. We had all good things. They would have plays, and they'd have musicals, they'd have lectures, they'd have sleight of hand, and singers used to come there, piano players. It was a beautiful thing. And that tent would be crowded. And my children often speak about how they would go to that Chautauqua.
How many people would a tent accommodate?
Oh, I can't tell you. They'd have a great big tent, and it would be filled. It would just be filled. And some of the older women, like, Mrs. Sherry, you didn't know Mrs. Sherry.
Nett Sherry, yes, I remember.
And there was quite a few their age would go in the afternoon. And they'd sit right up in front, you know, and to be sure they'd get a seat at night, they'd put a pillow on their chair. When the young kids would come, they'd want to sit in the front, so they'd take those cushions, put them back. And these old ladies, they didn't like that. Of course, they were awful old to us then. Not any of them were as old as I am today, you know. But I can see how they would get so mad, you know, and they'd speak to us mothers, and we wouldn't know anything about it, you know. That was one of the highlights of Akron.
Where would the tent be placed?
Up at the head of John Street there. There was a lot of vacant space up there.
Would it be where the high school athletic field is now?
I guess so. I just don't know. Yeah, I think up there. Mm-hmm. And they'd have just chairs, you know, just folding chairs. And sometimes it would be stormy and that roof would go sway, or the swings, the sides would sway in and out. And sometimes they'd have like a little circus up there too. But it was a most enjoyable thing. It really was. And all us younger, we were young then, you know, all in our 30s. And we'd all sit together and we'd hurry and get our work done in the morning so we could be there. I think it was from 2 to 4:30 in the afternoon. And then hurry home and get our dinners, suppers, and get right back there. It was a nice meeting. You'd meet all your friends there, you know, and it was nice. We all liked it.
What other cultural activities now do you remember, Ruby?
Well, I remember that the Eastern Stars would have a nice play once a year, and the school had wonderful plays. And the Masons would put on a play, too. But that was about all other than card clubs all over. Everybody belonged to a card club. I know I belonged to one that had 16 girls belonging to it, and we met every week.
What games did you play?
we started in with Pedro, then we went to 500, then we went to Briggs, then we went to Canasta, and by that time we had dwindled down to 2, and then we played samba. Now I played gym, not rummy, for half a cent a point. That's about all I've done. A big night here years ago. When my children were little, I would go down to the A&P store and buy 3 great big candy bars for 10 cents, 3 for 10. We'd go Saturday nights to the picture show, and all the stores stayed open till 9 o'clock, and there would be a lot of people, a lot of traffic. And of course, there was always a band concert there, which was very big band then played. And that was a nice Saturday. We always look forward to Saturday night. And the picture show was there with their popcorn, and peanuts and stuff.
Ruby, your husband worked at the National Gypsum?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And during the Depression, what was happening there?
It seems as though every month they worked 1 week less. Some weeks they'd work 1 day. Some weeks they wouldn't work any at all. And if it hadn't been for Mrs. Webster and I with the library, where we
You mean the restaurant?
No, the library.
Oh, the library?
The bakery. The bakery.
Yes.
I don't know what we would have done. Both the boys in school. But of course we got our butter and eggs, everything at wholesale prices, even some meats we got. And one night we got a cheese. A whole round of cheese. And Mrs. Webster and I divided it. We had a car then, and we parked the car across the street from the bakery. And when we got out to it, someone had stole our cheese. That was a terrible blow to us. Of course, it wasn't one of these great big ones, but it was a cheese. We never found out who got it. It was in the trunk of the car. But we survived. They were happy times, too. Well, then in 1940, we closed the bakery. My husband died then, and we didn't want to run anymore. The war was beginning, and we couldn't get things, and nuts and dates and figs and sugar and flour. Everything had gone up so much. And if we raised our prices 1 cent, people wouldn't buy the things. So we just thought and women were being hired in the plants, So Mrs. Webster went down to Lockport, and I went out to Buffalo Arms, and I worked 10 hours and a half nights, from 7 o'clock at night till 6:30 in the morning. And I worked there till the war was over. That was tough. And one Christmas there, both Lynn was in Africa and Robert was an aircraft carrier. He was an chief engineer in aircraft carrier around Japan. And it was Christmas Eve, and they started to play. They had music down there. I forgot what it was. I don't know what it was. They played White Christmas. And you thought of your children, And one by one, we put our heads down on the table and cried. That was the saddest Christmas I think I ever spent in my life. My husband had died a year before, both boys away, and I had rented my house on Pearl Place, and I lived down on Main Street over Mrs. Blount's secondhand store, and I never forget that. And when it was Christmas, I don't know, I can't remember where we got them, but as many children as you had in the war, you put that flag in your window. And I wonder if the Historical Society would like one of those flags.
Oh, yes.
I think the 2 of them. I've got them in boxes, both of the boys, but I think that they would like me to get one there.
Yes, they would very much like that, I know.
And I had a little Christmas tree I put in the window. And I know Lucille Foster,
Weaver?
Yeah, Lucille Weaver said, I went past your house, she said, that was when I lived down on Main Street. And she said, I looked up and you had a little Christmas tree in the window, she said, and I cried. Is that just like Lucille? Mm-hmm. If I do, yeah.
Let me know.
But there's, the years go by and you kind of